Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm pleased to introduce you to author E Lockhart. She's the author of We Were Liars, Genuine Fraud, The Disreputable History of Frankie, Landau-Banks, and a number of other novels. Her latest book, Family of Liars, is available now. Here today to talk more about her career and that new book is E Lockhart. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, E Lockhart.
Thanks for having me.
So I ask everybody the same question as we begin these conversations, which is, tell me, where does your story as an author begin?
I think it begins in the back of a theater. My father is a playwright named Len Jenkin, and he was a professor of playwriting at NYU, but also a much produced playwright in the New York theater scene, off Broadway primarily, and across the country. And so I spent a lot of summers with him. My parents were divorced. Sitting in the back of a theater and watching productions go up and seeing, the way a show changed when parts of the dialogue were rewritten, or the way a show changed with a change of lighting or costume or pacing. I got to kind of witness these plays take shape, and I think that was an incredibly useful education.
Yeah, so it's kind of in your blood a little bit, right? Being a storyteller.
Sure.
Well, when did you start writing your own stuff?
I began writing in third grade. I wrote a lot of fan fiction, I guess you would call it now, but we didn't call it that back then. I wrote imitations of Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren and The Wolves of Willoughby Chase by Joan Aiken. And then I kind of lost track of fiction writing for a while. And really, I would say, took it up seriously when I was in graduate school. I was studying to get a PhD in English literature, and I was very unhappy with this kind of career path that I had gotten myself onto. It had taken tremendous effort to get myself onto that path, and then I didn't want to be on it. So I started writing fiction as a way of, doing something else with my interest in fiction.
Yeah, well, tell me, going back to third grade, when you were writing, quote unquote fan fiction, what kind of encouragement, if any, did you get from people you may have been sharing some of your early work with?
Well, the best thing that happened was that with my Pippi Longstocking novel, and it was really long, my dad took it very seriously, and he typed the whole thing up. And he did it on two sides of a page so that you could fold it and it would be like a book. And we, went to his office at New York University, and we used the photocopier on the Stealthy, and we photocopied, like 50 copies of it, and stapled it with like a big special long staple gun that they had there. And then we went to this friend of his, my sentence structure there was terrible. I don't like it. He had a friend who was a silkscreen artist, and we went to the silkscreen artist's studio, and I designed a cover, and we silkscreened 50 covers, and we stapled those on. So I had a sort of first published book as far as I was concerned, and we were able to give my story out to, friends and neighbors and teachers and stuff like that. So that was the first time somebody took my writing seriously enough to spend some of their time and effort on it. And that made a big impression on me.
That is such a cool story about your dad. That's a very special moment. I mean, my memories of my dad when I was in third grade was him taking me to the golf course. That's about it.
Well, that's something.
No, it is. It is.
My
I'm not
my dad
dissing
never taught me a sporty thing.
it. But that's really cool. Now, did you query agents with that fan fiction of Pippi
No,
Longstockings or no? Okay. Do you still
no,
have it?
that would have been presumptuous and illegal. But yeah, it was, much later that I started thinking of it in some kind of more serious way.
Yeah. Well, do you still have a copy of that?
I do.
Okay, very cool. That's something to put up in a safety deposit box somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, tell me. So you said you're not really happy on the career path you were on. You were getting a PhD. What was your intention with that? To become a professor, a teacher, or what was the plan?
I think I didn't see really that far. I was a little lax in my undergraduate education. I spent a lot of time, taking ballet for credit and running the campus nightclub. And but I was nonetheless I had a wonderful class that was all about Charles Dickens, and I loved my Dickens class, and I read every single book, and I wrote a great paper for that class, and I remember doing a presentation that I was really proud of. So that I was, at times very intellectually engaged, but I was also goofing off a lot and not that focused. And I realized in my year after college that in lots of ways, I just was not as well educated as I wanted to be. And I knew I was good at school, and I just applied to go to more school, So I went to Columbia, and I was planning to study Victorian literature, which is what I did. But I didn't really know anything about literary theory as an undergrad. And when I got to Columbia, it was really the height of vogue for deconstruction and post-colonial theory. And so most of the time was not spent reading Dickens, but spent reading Derrida and Foucault and Edward Said and people like that. And oh my goodness, I was in over my head. I think that was a very good, I wanted a more aggressive education, a more thorough, a more rigorous education. I'm 100% got that, but I'm really not very theory minded. I just wanted to think about Dickens all day, or the Brontes, or Sherlock Holmes, or, whatever. I took an amazing class in South African novelists, right? And that I loved. We just read all these great writers. But I just couldn't wait to really get out of there. It was not a good fit. And I realized that what I was going to do, and the only thing that Columbia thought I should do, was get a tenure track job at a research university. So there was kind of no room to be interested in pedagogy, interested in the teaching of writing, interested in maybe teaching high school, interested in any of the other things you might do with such a degree, or teaching in a small college, right? None of those were rated at that time. And I think that's shifted in terms of how English departments handle the career paths of their students. But it was very much what was happening at the time. So I was just looking to wrench myself off of what felt suddenly like a very narrow path full of Derrida.
So bridge me between the PhD program and writing your first novel. What happened? How did you approach it?
Oh, I did it during.
Oh, you did it during. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about that process. Was this the first piece of fiction you've written since third grade, or?
I mean, it's a fuzzy story. It doesn't make a great I wrote a picture book, I wrote a middle grade novel, I wrote a book of essays, then I wrote another picture book, then I wrote a adult novel. And by this time I was out of school, and I was supporting myself teaching part-time. And all those things were published, but none of them had really any kind of great response, So I was proud of the work that I had done, and I was also disappointed in not really having much traction in terms of a career or long-term relationships with editors. I mean, this is a very unnuanced way of saying it, but that's the gist. And so I was a little bit desperate and confused about what to do next. And I wanted to write another novel, but I had one that was going badly, and I was really stalled on it. And my editor for my fiction had left publishing and wasn't even available to talk to anymore. So I called up my agent and I said, I think I just need to not be teaching, 3 courses at 3 different New York City universities all at once. And plus like freelancing for magazines and writing about, very silly things for glossy women's magazines. Not that they're always silly, but I had silly assignments, I will tell you that. So I said, could you get me a job writing anything? I will ghostwrite Nancy Drew. I will, ghostwrite a cookbook. I will, anything that can, I will, anything as long as it's writing, I felt like would further my career in terms of strengthening my skills and my relationships in publishing and kind of keep me in the mix. And she was like, okay, let me look around. And she called me back a week later and said, there's an editor at Random House who is one of the 5 people in the world who read your adult novel. And she liked it. And she's looking for young adult book proposals. And there was a very specific note that they were looking to hit, or a demographic or type of genre thing, which was Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, but edgy. Mm-hmm. So I was like, I can do that. And I went out and I got all these books, and I went to Books of Wonder, which is a beautiful children's bookstore in Manhattan that I had always loved and always gone to. And I got, I got Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging by Louise Renison, and I got Gingerbread by Rachel Cohn, and I got Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, and I got some novels by Meg Cabot, who wrote Princess Diaries and All American Girl. And these books were so smart. Most of them were very, very witty. They were playful in terms of their narrative form. They sometimes were totally realistic and sometimes had a little bit of magic. I just thought, like, these were all written by smart writers who were not talking down to their young readers at all. And I was really impressed. And I thought, I think I do have it in me to, write in this space. And I wrote a book proposal. I got a 2-book deal. And that was the launch of my identity as a YA writer. And it was a really great stroke of luck for me to get a 2-book deal, but also to find a creative space where I was somehow able to be my best self.
Yeah. How do you feel your life changed after getting that deal and having that first success?
Well, I mean, I eventually became a full-time writer, and the blessing of being an adjunct college professor is that you can drop one job and keep the other 2, and then drop the second job and keep one. And, and sometimes you can say, hey, I need an extra class this semester, and they'll very often find it for you, so I was able to piece myself together by reducing my teaching and then reducing my magazine writing until I was writing full-time as a fiction writer. And I also got a chance to become part of the young adult literature community. And that was a big life changer because those people are fun-loving and awesome. I made some really good friends, and young adult fiction writers get the chance to connect with teachers and librarians and other advocates for, youth literacy. And there are sort of ways to be useful if you work in this sphere, which I don't think is true so much for adult fiction writers. There's issues, right? There's book banning, which centers mostly around books for teenagers and other young people. There's literacy access and access to information about sexual health and well-being. There's all kinds of opportunities to kind of be of use in thinking about the needs of the audience for whom we write.
Yeah.
And so it's bigger than just, is my book popular, or did people read it, or did I get good reviews? It's a different way of going out in the world as a fiction creator.
Yeah, I mean, it's so critically important because so many, and I think we're well over the 150 mark on Uncorking a Story now in terms of interviews, but so many authors I talk to, I mean, New York Times bestsellers tell me they were influenced by something in their childhood, and it's usually a teacher or a librarian. But that's where the seed gets planted inside them that, hey, maybe I could be a writer someday, or it fuels their love of reading, which then, fuels an interest in writing. So that community aspect to me is really cool. So many of the people who listen to the show are aspiring authors themselves. So I'd love for you just to reflect a little bit more on the importance of community, like having a community of people to be around as an author.
Well, I know a lot of people really thrive in having critique groups or something like that. And that's really never been my way. I'm a little more of a more solitary animal, but I have found it incredibly useful in terms of information sharing and mutual career support. So, to be frank, I have friends that I talk about money with, right? And that is an eye opener, right? Someone says, "Oh, I get paid this for such and such a type of book," or I get my payout structure this way. And you think, "Oh my God," right? Okay, we have similar sales numbers. I'm not getting paid properly. So, or I go after X in my contract, or we also talk about how to navigate relationships with editors or publicists, which can be really complicated. And we share resources for that. And we often, support each other's books on social media, and that's like the visible part of that. But that's not really the most important thing by any means. I think the most important thing is having people that you can kind of talk shop with in a weird job that not a lot of people have. And that, my parent friends and my, friends that I know through my spouse's job and friends that I grew up with, like those people don't understand my job, and that's fine. I don't always understand their, job as a cardiologist or whatever, right? We don't have to understand each other's jobs, but it's really nice to have friends who understand what this job is. And sometimes that has to do with creative conversations, but a lot of it also has to do with demystifying what, even after all these years, is still a mysterious set of stuff that goes on in publishing.
Yeah, no, there's no MBA program for that type of thing. I mean, I guess you could say, an MFA program could do it, but even so, it is a very nuanced sort of career path. But let's talk about Family of Liars. Tell me a little bit more about this book. I know it's a prequel to a previous book, so just tell me what you can about Family of Liars.
Okay, so We Were Liars, if you don't know it, is set on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts. And by private island, I mean it's owned by one family, the Sinclair family. And it is an amnesia story and a love story. It has many thriller elements. It has a big plot twist. And it came out back in 2014. And then during the years of the pandemic, a very strange thing happened to me, which was that people began making videos about We Were Liars on TikTok. And these videos, some of them were aesthetics, meaning like they pick some sort of cool song and they collect a whole bunch of images and kind of make a collage that gives you the vibe of the book. And of course, they do this for other books too, not just mine. And some of them were kind of sped up reactions. So they'd show themselves reading part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and part 5. And what they were doing when they hit part 5 was either weeping hysterically with like snot and mascara running down their faces, or they were like throwing the book across the room and saying like WTF. So it's those second kind of videos that I think propelled this book, up to the top of the bestseller list where it's been for a really long time now. So I suddenly had all these readers. And, some of my books have been popular and some of them are just not. And I felt so lucky to suddenly have this popular book, that was published so long ago. And my publisher asked if I might be interested in writing a follow-up novel. And I really did not think that a sequel to that particular book would be satisfying for my readers or for me to write. And so I had said no a couple times. And then I, kind of long story short, I got an idea to write a prequel set on that same private island off the coast of Massachusetts, a windswept island with 2 little beaches and a lot of craggy rocks and a number of houses that all belong to this family. And I set it 27 years earlier than the first book. So it's essentially the story of people who are parents in the first book back when they're teenagers in 1987. So it's the story of these 3 young women who spend every summer on this island and are spending yet another summer. And the eldest is 17 and it's her story. And she is just in the process of dealing with a large jaw reconstruction surgery that she had that has changed her appearance to be more conventionally good looking. And also with grief over the death of a young sibling. So she's processing a lot and suffering through a codeine addiction as a result of the jaw surgery and the grief. And into their lives on this summer come 3 attractive boys and 1 girl. They arrive by boat and they basically are guests who don't leave. And they stay all summer and they upend the lives of these teenagers in a big way. And, it's a thriller. So some very bad things happen.
How much fun, if at all, was it to write about 1987, kind of take that trip back in time in your DeLorean?
Right. That was a kick. I mean, everybody is on a private island and barely ever leaves. So there was not a lot of fun to be had with pop culture, with cars, with clothes. No one's dressing up on this island, right? But I did do a lot of fun research about food. There's a lot of 80s food in there, a lot of sun-dried tomatoes and other things that were popular just then. And a little bit of music. I made a playlist. There are some songs in the book, but I also made a kind of extended mixtape, we'll call it, but it's a playlist. You can find it on Apple Music or on Spotify under Family of Liars, or if you look up, the easiest way to find it if your listeners are curious, I know a lot of people do love a playlist to go with books, is at my blog, which is theboyfriendlist.com. And there's a post near the top that links to the Spotify playlist and to the Apple Music playlist. So I made those and that was super fun and a real trip down memory lane in terms of what we were listening to back in 1987. And then the last thing was slang. And I usually like to invent my own slang because I don't like to date my stories by trying to be super current. I feel like I probably would get it wrong in some ways if I was just trying to mimic the speech of a group of kids, who are so much younger than I. There's nuances of how you use slang that I could get wrong. So I generally just kind of create an idiolect for my characters that, constitutes the set of slang and rhythms of speech and catchphrases and stuff that whatever that specific small group of people uses. It could be, a group of kids at a boarding school, or it could be, the kids who are on this private island, or whatever it is. I like to sort of self-create that verbal landscape. But for Family of Liars, I did do some research into 80s slang and, kind of layered some lovely old phrases in there. And
Yeah, you got to be careful with the 80s slang because it wasn't necessarily politically correct. I was having lunch the other day with somebody and we said, the words we used to say in the 80s were, I mean, they just wouldn't fly today, because we
No,
used
we
to
said
say,
some
hey,
terrible things, and I just
terrible things. And we
left
didn't mean
us.
it, we didn't mean it, when we said you're so retarded, like we didn't really mean that, but like looking back, it's like, oh my gosh. And that's just like,
But it's rooted in a disregard,
oh, yeah, absolutely,
So it
absolutely.
just, yeah. But there's a huge number of 80s words for vomit. I feel like we don't have anywhere near so many slang words for vomit as chunder and
Earl.
curl, exactly. So some of those got in there.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. Very cool. I have some fun questions for you. We're going to take a little bit more of a trip down memory lane.
Sure.
So tell me what, and I ask these of everybody. I'm always curious how people answer this first one, but thinking about, when you were a child, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were growing up?
I grew up mostly without a television.
Interesting.
I love the
Interesting.
Brady Bunch, though.
Brady Bunch comes up quite often. I don't know what it is about the Brady Bunch. My wife is I think she's got a PhD in the Brady Bunch. She could, cite it chapter and verse almost. What did you like about it?
I was an only child, so I liked the family, and I liked my parents were children of the counterculture, so I liked the mom, the dad, the dog, the formal dining room, you know,
The housekeeper?
yeah, maybe the housekeeper, that like determinedly like middle class safety of all of that, that suburban life seemed warm and safe. I think it was a comfort watch. I know we had a television sometimes and sometimes didn't, but the year that I was in 5th grade, I was allowed to watch the Brady Bunch at 6 p.m. before dinner, and I watched it every day.
The story of a lovely lady. Let's talk about music then. So thinking about your childhood, what were you listening to? Well, maybe pick teenage years. What were you, what was in your headphones?
You act like we had headphones back then.
Well, maybe, I mean, I don't see with a transistor radio or anything like that.
No, it was on the car radio for the most part.
Okay.
Well, I went to see the Violent Femmes when I was
Oh man, great
years
band.
old, and that was one of my first concerts. It was definitely the first concert I remember going to without a grown-up. I went with friends at an all-ages club, and I'd never heard of them, and they were so electric. And I went out and I bought that album, first Violent Femmes album, and that was definitely the soundtrack to my teenage years. But again, I only had the album, right? There were no CDs. And I don't think I even had a cassette player until college. I think I got one to go to college with. So I had to listen to it at home on the record player. So that cramped my style a little bit.
So Violent Femmes, anyone else come to mind?
Oh, well, I love the Eurythmics. I thought Annie Lennox was just a revelation of, this kind of androgyny, definitely female identified androgyny in a way that I thought was very sexy and powerful and surprising. And she looked like nothing could ever hurt her, but then her songs were so heartbreaking and vulnerable, and her voice is so vulnerable. So I thought that was an amazing combination.
Yeah, she and Dave Stewart. That was just a great combination.
Yeah, they were great.
I love them. Okay, so how about this? I know you mentioned, I think I read somewhere in your biography, your favorite theme park attraction is the Haunted Mansion.
Well, I have many beloved theme park attractions. I love a theme park, but I like to go on a fictional ride, like anything that's taking me into some other world, like the Disney Peter Pan ride that takes you to Neverland, or the Haunted Mansion. I mean, the Haunted Mansion does hold up extremely well, I think. But really anything that's going to take me into a fictional universe, I find those very thrilling, even if they're cheesy.
Yeah. No, I remember as a kid, I grew up in South Florida. And as a kid, my dad worked for American Express, and I used to joke, he worked in sales, but he was really like the chief golf officer. Like he was always taking customers to play golf, and there was always a tournament up in Orlando. And there was a Disney tie-in. So for like 3 years in a row, we got to go to Disney. And this was like not too long after it opened. Like it was still like Epcot wasn't even built yet.
Oh, wow.
And I remember going on the Haunted Mansion as a kid and just thinking that this is probably one of the coolest things I've ever been on, because it wasn't a roller coaster. It just told a story. And I loved it. And then, fast forward, I don't know, 30 years, I'm at Disney with my, we have triplets at the time. They were probably 6 or 7 years old. And we took them to Disney and took them on the Haunted Mansion. My daughter Grace almost had a nervous breakdown because she was so scared.
Oh,
I'm like, honey, it's not real. She goes, want to go. And that was just the preamble where you're kind of going in and, they're doing a little bit more of a backstory. Once she got into the ride, she was fine. But I know I still love that ride. That and Pirates of the Caribbean, I think, are two of my.
Pirates of the Caribbean, I loved. It didn't hold up as well for me on a re-ride as an adult. They've changed it, but also some of it is just like, you're like, how did I ever think this was okay? There's like, they auction a woman off at some point, and some things like that whatever, they're pirates, we know they're bad, but it just doesn't. I'd love to see that ride like maybe completely reinvented, like so that it was still Pirates of the Caribbean, but it was some kind of new, more complicated, or I don't know, maybe more from the movies, because now they've just sort of slapped little bits of the movie onto it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I preferred it when, back in '82, before they had Johnny Depp involved in it.
I didn't need to see Johnny Depp, or I wanted to full immersion in like the whole movie world.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. So how do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or, computer screen, depending on how you write?
It's not my favorite. The getting started on a project is very often the hardest part for me, is that, sort of ramping up into understanding what the fictional world is. When you don't quite know how your narrator sounds, and when you don't quite know what your world is, and and maybe you don't quite know what your plot is, that is when fiction writing seems very hard. But once I'm in the middle of it, I usually feel like I get carried along by the current to a certain extent.
Did you feel like that with Family of Liars, knowing that you kind of had a world created from We Were Liars?
Yeah, in that sense, Family of Liars was a much easier thing to write, because I did know the world, and I also knew the kinds of things that are at stake in this world, right? I knew where the story world was going to put pressure on my heroine, and I knew certain elements that I definitely wanted to include. So the challenge was, because people had a big reaction to We Were Liars, and either loved it like crazy and read it 15 times, or hated it so much they needed to like tell all the world how much they hated it. I knew I needed to create, the same kind of cognitive effect, like a big emotional reaction, and a feeling of shock. But I needed to do it in a totally different way. And I also needed to use these various elements, like there are fairy tales that are threaded through We Were Liars. I needed to use fairy tales again, but I needed to use them in a way that functions differently, right? So that part of it was very challenging. But coming back to the world and understanding the characters and how the world puts pressure on them, that was all easier in a lot of ways than starting a completely new book.
Yeah. I mean, just going back to third grade for a second, where you were writing, quote unquote fan fiction, would you consider, these TikTok stories that, your fans were putting together about We Were Liars, could they in a way be fan fiction, or no?
I think some of them are book criticism, and some of them are, I wouldn't call them fan fiction because they're not creating new narratives within the world, but they're there's certainly reader responses. I mean, I wrote my dissertation on reader response, and reader response can take shape in all kinds of ways, right? It can be reviews, right? Or it can be artistic responses like cartoons or fan art or aesthetics, created that show what a text means to that individual reader. Sometimes there's silly limericks people write or parody song lyrics or, all kinds of things that people do in response. But you can look at those and you can do, a scholarly assessment of what a text meant at a particular moment of reception by looking at those kinds of responses. And of course, we have many, many more now than we did in the 19th century in terms of, things that you could research and record. So I sort of think of them in that context. But also, I don't, it would not be a good use of my time to be trolling the internet for people's responses to my books. I'm much better off, trying to write a new one.
Yeah, absolutely. And last up, thinking about that little girl who was with her dad, photocopying and binding that Pippi Longstocking's tale. If you could whisper some words of advice or encouragement into her ear, what are some of the things you would tell her?
Well, I'll say this. I had a creative writing teacher in college who told me that I was a solid B student, so he hadn't bothered to read my work. He'd read stuff of mine earlier in the semester, but at the end of the semester, when I turned in all my rewritten stories, he just didn't read them and didn't comment on them and basically refused to because I was a B student and he knew it, which he told me. And this was very discouraging. And I think that I was looking for some kind of institutional validation of talent. And I do not think that institutional validation of talent is helpful even to people who get it, particularly. I think that, at least in terms of creative writing, there's not really a thing that is talent. There's a thing that is storytelling skill and craft, and you can learn it. And there's a thing that is, opening up yourself to being emotionally vulnerable once you've learned those skills and trying to write something that is truthful, that also taps into your imagination. But those are all skills that you can learn. And I don't think I had any particular talent. I had a drive that, you could see all the way back to third grade to try to learn how to do this thing, right? And so I became pretty much a self-taught writer. I didn't take any creative writing classes after that, and that was the only one I've ever taken. So I read a lot of craft books, taught in an MFA program for a while. So I heard lectures from my fellow colleagues and learned a tremendous amount there. But for the most part, I'm a self-taught writer, and I think that's available to everybody. I don't think I would tell little me and also, your listeners who want to be writers that, a creative writing program is lovely, and a class that you like, that you get something out of, is great. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But, don't let the things that happen in those rooms make you think that you can't do this.
Well, that is a great point to end on. The book is Family of Liars. The author is E Lockhart. Thank you so much for joining me today on Uncorking a Story.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, actually, before we end, any social media or websites we could direct listeners to learn more about you?
Oh, yes. I love hanging out on Instagram, where I am at E Lockhart Books, Lockhart. And you can find me on Twitter at E Lockhart. And you can find me on TikTok, somewhat terrifyingly, at E Lockhart Books as well.
Very good. Thank you once again for joining me, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.